I remember playing this game so much when we once went on holiday to Benidorm, and I remember playing it on the bus when we were there. I remember playing it in the room that we were in a lot. I just remember playing so much of this game, and I also remember my friend Josh also playing a lot of this game as well. And this game is Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald versions. This is the third generation of the Pokemon franchise. And this is the first set of games that were on the Game Boy Advance. And so the graphics were clearly better. You could see that there was more finer detail in the graphics, and during battle you could see the environment around you as well, which was quite nice to see. But I think I'm going to have to say something a little bit controversial here. As far as graphics of 2D games go, this game is one of my favourites. And in fact, I know there was this big push for Pokemon to go 3D, and they did that with Pokemon X and Y. But to be honest, I think that graphic-wise, this is the best looking it's ever been. But I was really happy to get this game, although I think by this time my poker craze, if you want to call it that, was kind of dying out because I was more into other RPGs and I wasn't playing Pokemon as much. But I still did get this game, and for clarity I got Ruby version, and I still had a lot of fun with this game. Now, a few features that this game had that the previous Pokemon games didn't have. One of them was that it had different natures for the Pokemon, and that would basically affect how the different Pokemon acted. But I also remember, in fact this is one of the big things I remember about it that I thought was fantastic, and I actually loved this feature, was the idea of the dens. Now, I generally don't care much about multiplayer, but this was kind of a way for you to show off your collection and for a way for you to get yourself out there across other people's games. The way that the dens worked was that throughout the game there were all these cracks in the wall, and you could use these little areas to create dens, and in the dens you could put down little furniture based on things that you had collected that you may have gotten from completing different goals and different tasks, and you can put them around, and that includes things like tents and panels that make notes when you step on them, or panels that you step on and it pushes you in a certain direction. And you could, using the link cable, get this den into someone else's game, and if you went into someone else's den that was in your game, you could talk to them and you could fight them with them using the Pokemon that they had when they linked. And I absolutely loved that feature. Another example of something that I really liked with this game was the fact that you could also use multiple types of bikes that would allow you to get from different places. And I also remember, for example, the tower where you get Rayquaza. I remember having to try to climb that tower and try to very nimbly get across all of the cracked floors by riding over them really fast and then like turning at the right time and everything. It was a lot of fun. Now, they added also double battles to this game, and to be honest, the double battles weren't something that I was particularly fond of. I mean, I didn't dislike them, I just didn't really find myself into them as much. But this game overall, I found that if you took the previous games and just cleaned off the edges to make things a little bit more user-friendly, such as transfer Pokemon between the boxes and all that sort of stuff, this was a very, very nice game at doing that. Also, just to point out that this game has a very specific musical style that's kind of hard to describe. It's kind of like trumpet sounds, like Game Boy Advance trumpet sounds, that is very, very familiar with this game. And it's a type of game where you can listen to the soundtrack and think, yep, that's definitely from Pokemon Gen 3. Even if you're not familiar with the track itself, you can recognize that aspect of it, and therefore pinpoint which game it's from. Unfortunately, I never actually did complete this game, but I did later on watch a Let's Play, and I did find out that I got really close to the end, despite the fact that I didn't actually complete this game. And this game is just an example of just things that I love in games. Long form gameplay where you have to think about different leveling systems and different ways to progress through the game. Large periods of time where there's little to no story, strategy and tactics. This game just had all of those things, and this game is Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga 2. So I'll explain how combat works in this game, and I will also explain how the leveling system works in this game as well. This game uses what is known as the press turn combat system, which is just something that they made up. And the idea is that it goes between the player's turn and the enemy's turn. And the way that your turn works is that you have 3 characters or up to 3 characters in your party at one time, and you assign them an order, and you are assigned 1 press per character that you have, a press being the name for a little hexagon symbol in the corner. And it will basically scroll through your characters, and by taking a turn it will use up one of these presses, it will take one of them away. So the idea is that generally speaking you will have 1 turn per character in the order that you set them out to be. However, if you deal a critical hit, or you hit an enemy's elemental weakness, or if you skip that character's turn, it will turn that icon into a flashing icon, and what that means is that it's still there and it can still be used. And as long as you have these symbols available, then you can turn a non-flashy one into a flashy one, and once you've cycled through all of your characters you can start again. So say you have the first character deal a critical hit, and then you have another 2 turns, then that first one that's flashing, that will allow you to go back and have another turn with that first character in the list. But this also works both ways. If you miss or you hit an elemental resistance, then that will consume 2 of the icons rather than just 1. And so it is purely strategy based. Now, as for the way that you learn abilities, it kind of has this skill tree type thing, and I've always said that skill trees are, generally speaking, a pretty lazy leveling system. But even still, this one is not a tree, so to speak. It's more like a board with all of these different icons across. And the way that it works is that you get money from defeating enemies, and you can spend the money to assign a specific slot, a particular mantra, as they're called, to a character, and then they will gain their Atma points to eventually learn the set of abilities that is that mantra. And characters can equip up to 8 mantra at once. And sorry, not 8 mantra, they can equip 8 abilities at once, and you can equip abilities that you've learnt. So this incorporates anything from the physical attacks that will cost HP to use, magic attacks that will cost MP to use, and passive skills that will grant you with extra bonuses. And what's great about this is that the further outwards that you go, the more that this board will grow also. And to try to reinforce a sense of diversity amongst your characters, the game will implement this system where there are certain nodes on the grid that you have to activate by clearing all of the mantra surrounding it. But you can do that through multiple characters. So the idea is you want 1 character to maybe do 2 of them, and the other character to maybe do 3 of them, or something like that. And then someone else can do 1 of them, and then you will unlock that mantra. And it might be something like a static boost, like strength plus so much. But the further that you go out, you start getting all of these extra branches, and there will be extra ones at the far ends that will require you to defeat super bosses in order to be able to unlock, and those ones are very, very expensive. And that's one of the key things about this game as well, is that there's a lot more focus on abilities than there is strictly to do with levels, because a level up will always give you the same amount of points per level up, regardless of what level it is. And because of what I mentioned before about hitting elemental weaknesses and all that, it really, really helps to get the wide variety of different elemental attacks amongst all of your characters. The dungeon layout is also something that I really, really like in these types of games. They are large, and they're all about just going through and facing off against a load of enemies and getting loads of experience and having to heal up every so often, and just all of that lovely, lovely stuff. And I just love it. And of course you will get the odd person who says like, this is terrible, oh I hate this. It's like when people complain about like caves in Pokemon. I don't get it. I love caves in Pokemon. I love those large stretches of time where you just have constant battles and all that exploration that goes with it. I love those moments. This is a game that was very special to me and still is, and this game I used to play in my bedroom and my dad would come and watch me play it every so often. And this game, whilst not being an RPG, was really, I think, my first experience of a game that actually felt like a big adventure. Because when I think of games that I had played from before, like on the Mega Drive, or even earlier games on the PlayStation, they all felt like they had a very limited scope to them. But this game I remember spending a lot of time on, and this is Tomb Raider 2. I absolutely love Tomb Raider 2. And whilst I do think it's likely that I played the demo of Tomb Raider 1 before this, I'm not too sure about that, but I remember this was the first game I played where I actually felt like I was on this grand adventure. At least it's the first game that I remember feeling like that with. But this game is an action adventure game, which is the best way I can think to describe it. It has puzzles and it has shooting in it, which you should probably know by now that it's a Tomb Raider game, so it's got shooting in it. But a lot of people do complain and say that the shooting mechanics aren't very good, and I think they're okay. You basically press triangle to bring your guns out, and you hold down the X button to continuously shoot, and you will basically auto-aim most of the time. There are different weapons you can get that have a limited amount of ammo, like the automatic pistols, which is a basic upgrade to the pistols, the Uzis. You start with a shotgun, and you can also get things like a grenade launcher and a harpoon gun for underwater. But the combat itself is really simple, and I'm perfectly fine with that, because I mean, how many games do we have where you have to aim a little target towards an enemy and then shoot from there? I mean, that's basically the standard for all games released in the West these days, or games made in the West, should I say, for the most part. But yeah, even just the very start of the game where you're at the Great Wall of China and you have to find a way to climb out of this rocky pit that you start in, even that, I felt this sense of adventure from that I was finding my way around and trying to escape. And I did complete this game. I didn't collect all of the secrets. There are basically 3 secrets per level. There's the stone, jade and gold statues that you can find, which are basically the secrets. But I didn't get all of the secrets. But from an action adventure standpoint, I really felt that this game was just fantastic. And one of the things I always say is that if you can create an environment that elicits a sort of feeling from the player that's really strong, then that is something that's very good, and I consider that to be a success. Now, this may be partially because of how young I was when I played this game, and like how I said, it was my first sense of real big adventure, but even then, the levels stick in my mind so strongly, and there are particular instances I can think of where it just feels really big and epic. Like I remember there's one level when you are in this wrecked ship under the sea, and there's one part where you're just walking along and suddenly you see this massive hole. And another thing that this game uses really well is its sound design. It doesn't really have music much, but it does have a lot of little musical moments here and there that really help to enhance the feeling of the game. Like if you're in a big open area or there's a big pit, it might make a doo sound, which is really effective, I think. And I always think of Tomb Raider as a sort of like a parallel to The Legend of Zelda, and so for example Ocarina of Time. And I always say that Ocarina of Time, the water temple is the best, because that's where it actually feels like the level as a whole is a puzzle. There's parts here that affect parts over there, and you've got to think about the mechanics of raising the water level to different amounts. And what I like about that level is the same as what I like about Tomb Raider 2 as a whole. And another example of the big moments that I can tell you about is, for example, in the Opera House, which is one of my favourite levels. There is a part where you are running across the roof of this giant room, and the wooden planks aren't very stable, so you're running along, jumping at the right time, and no, it's not quick time events or any of that stupid rubbish. It's actually proper platforming with platforms that crumble. No, it doesn't do dynamic camera angles where the camera pans to the ledge where you're grabbing it. No, it's all organic. It's all within the game. And later on in that level, you will appear back in that room, but from below, and you will look up and you're like, oh, this is the room that I was trying not to fall into ages ago. And it's really, really good. And my general sense of direction in games is really bad. Not even in games, just general sense of direction isn't very good generally. But with this game, I have a much easier time remembering these big levels and the different ways that things interact with each other. And I think that the puzzles in the levels also do have that large form thinking requirement, and I just absolutely love it. And so, despite all of the marketing and advertisements that we have for games these days where it's like, ooh, look at this, it's in a massive open world, ooh, don't you feel immersed? Look at all of these NPCs, you can kill and save any of them. I just think that's nonsense. You want an immersive game, you want one where you really can feel like you are a part of that world and where you interact and it actually has depth to it. Tomb Raider 2, that's where it's at.